What if the person you love could disappear while their body kept walking around? Not through death, not through disease, but through science so strange, so invasive, that it questions whether you is even one thing. In 1848, a rod went through a man's skull and left someone else behind. In the 1970s, a surgeon kept a severed head alive, awake, aware, and furious. And in quiet hospital rooms, doctors discovered something that should not be possible. That inside your head, right now, there may be two different minds, two people, one skull, and neither of them may fully know the other exists. This is the story of the experiments that broke what we thought a self was. September 13th, 1848, Cavendish, Vermont. A railroad crew is blasting rock to lay new track. Their foreman is 25-year-old Phineas Gage, sharp, reliable, well-liked by every man on his crew. Gage's job is simple but deadly if rushed. Pack explosive powder into a drilled hole using an iron rod. The rod is over 3 feet long, over an inch thick, weighs 13 pounds. On this afternoon, Gage is distracted for 1 second too long. The rod strikes rock. A spark ignites the powder. The explosion launches the rod upward, through his cheek, behind his eye, out the top of his skull. It lands 80 feet away, covered in blood and brain matter. By every law of medicine, Phineas Gage should have died instantly. He did not. Witnesses say he spoke within minutes. He sat upright in the cart that carried him to the doctor. He even joked about his injury on the ride there. Doctors cleaned the wound, removed bone fragments, watched, waited, and somehow he survived. The town called it a miracle. But the real story hadn't even started yet. Weeks passed. Gage's body healed almost completely. He could walk, talk, remember his own name, his own life, his own crew. But something else had changed. Something no doctor could stitch back together. His physician, Dr. Harlow, described a man who was suddenly fitful, irreverent, impatient of restraint. Gage began cursing in ways his friends said were not previously his custom. He couldn't hold a plan in his head long enough to finish it. The careful, respected foreman was gone. Friends who had known him for years said the same haunting thing. Gage was no longer Gage. His memories were untouched. His muscles worked fine. His voice was the same. But the person speaking felt like someone new wearing a familiar face. For the first time in medical history, doctors were forced to ask a terrifying question. What if personality, your personality, isn't something you have, but something that lives in a physical place? What if it can be destroyed, like tissue, like bone, with the wrong kind of damage? Gage's frontal lobe had been destroyed, and with it, seemingly, part of his identity. It shattered a belief that had stood for centuries, that the soul, the self, existed somewhere science could never reach. Phineas Gage proved that theory wrong with a single rod of iron. But over 100 years later, one man would take that discovery and push it somewhere far darker. Meet Dr. Robert White, a brilliant American neurosurgeon, a respected voice on medical ethics for the Vatican, and, quietly, the architect of one of the most disturbing experiments of the 20th century. White wasn't interested in healing brains. He was obsessed with a single question. Could a brain survive without its body? Not preserved, not frozen, alive, thinking, aware. In 1970, his team performed a surgery that still unsettles scientists today. They took the head of one monkey and grafted it onto the body of another. Surgeons worked for hours, reconnecting blood vessels with microscopic precision. Then, the monkey opened its eyes. It could see. It could hear. It could smell the room around it. At one point, it reportedly tried to bite one of the researchers. The brain was fully awake, fully aware, trapped on a body that wasn't its own. Here's the detail that makes this truly disturbing. The spinal cord was never reconnected, only the blood supply, which meant the brain was conscious, but paralyzed completely, aware of everything, able to control nothing. The monkey survived for several days in this state before it died. White didn't see this as a horror. He saw it as proof of a theory. He believed the brain wasn't just part of the body. He believed the brain was the person. The body was just the vehicle carrying it. For decades, White pursued the same surgery for a human patient. He claimed it was technically possible. He even said he had a willing volunteer, a man paralyzed from the neck down, with nothing left to lose. The surgery never happened. The science still isn't there to reconnect a human spinal cord, which means even today a successful transplant would leave someone forever unable to move, a living mind, permanently trapped inside a body it could never control. White spent his life chasing a single unbearable question. If he could separate the brain from everything else, would the person who woke up still be them? Nobody has an answer. But somewhere else in medicine, doctors were about to stumble onto something almost as unsettling. not by separating a brain from a body, but by separating a brain from itself. For patients with severe epilepsy, surgeons developed a radical treatment. Cut the corpus callosum, the thick bridge of nerves connecting the brain's two halves. It worked. Seizures stopped spreading between hemispheres. Patients went home, resumed their lives, seemed completely, perfectly normal. But scientists Roger Sperry and Michael Gazzaniga wanted to know something deeper. What happens inside a brain when its two halves can no longer talk to each other? They designed a simple experiment. Show something to only the left side of a patient's vision. That information goes straight to the right hemisphere, the half that usually can't speak. Ask the patient what they saw. Nothing, they'd say, completely certain, not lying, genuinely unaware. But then researchers asked the patient's left hand, controlled by that same silent hemisphere, to point. The hand reached out and correctly identified the object every time. One half of the brain knew. The other half had no idea it knew. Got stranger. In some patients, one hand would begin buttoning a shirt, while the other hand almost immediately started unbuttoning it. Two different intentions, two different decisions, one single body. Then came the discovery that changed neuroscience forever. When the speaking half of the brain was confronted with an action it didn't consciously choose, it didn't stay silent, it didn't admit confusion. It invented a reason, instantly, confidently, completely convinced it was true. Gazzaniga called this process the interpreter. Part of your brain whose entire job is to make sense of things, even when it has to make the story up, which raises a question most people never want to ask themselves. How much of what you believe about your own choices is your interpreter quietly filling in the gap? Berry won the Nobel Prize for this discovery in 1981 because he'd proven something almost impossible to accept, that the unified you, the single voice in your head, might be more fragile than it feels. 3 stories. One terrifying thread running through all of them. A man who lost his identity when a rod destroyed one part of his brain. A surgeon who proved a mind could survive, trapped, aware, disconnected from its own body. And ordinary patients who revealed that a single skull might hold more than one mind. We like to think of the brain as something we simply have. A tool, an organ, a container for the real us. But Gage, White, and Sperry all point to something far stranger. The brain isn't just where you think. In every measurable physical way, the brain is you. Change its structure, and the person changes. Separated from the body, an identity becomes a question with no clean answer. Split it in half, and you may not be as singular as you feel. So the next time you're completely certain about why you did something, ask yourself an uncomfortable question. Is that the truth? Or is that just your interpreter telling you a story you want to believe? If this made your skin crawl a little, you're not alone. Subscribe for more true stories science almost forgot to warn you about. Because the strangest experiments in history weren't performed on monsters. They were performed on people just like you,